Imagine shooting a wild hog, cutting into it, only to discover its fat has turned bright blue. That isn't a disease, it isn't a mutation, and it isn't something nature ever intended. It was designed that way by the government. Because Texas has spent decades fighting an invasive animal that breeds faster than hunters can remove it. By the mid-2010s, officials believed the problem had become so severe that they approved one of the most controversial wildlife control measures in the state's history, a poison called Kaput Feral Hog Bait. Its active ingredient is warfarin, a blood thinner, and one of its most unusual features is a blue dye that stains a poisoned hog's fat, warning anyone who finds the carcass not to eat it. Supporters called it an overdue solution to a crisis costing Texas more than $52 million every year. Critics warned it could create entirely new problems for wildlife, hunters, and the environment. Years later, the debate still hasn't ended, because the real story isn't just about the poison. It's about how Texas reached the point where poisoning millions of wild hogs became a serious option. Texas has one of the largest feral hog populations in the United States. Current estimates put the number at roughly 2 million animals. They roam across most of the state. Every year, they destroy crops, tear up pasture land, damage fences, roads, and irrigation systems. They contaminate water sources. They also compete with native wildlife for food and habitat. The financial cost is estimated at more than $52 million in agricultural damage every year. Hunters remove hundreds of thousands annually. Professional trappers remove thousands more, but yet the population of the feral hogs keeps growing. Female feral hogs can begin breeding before they are a year old. Under favorable conditions, they can produce multiple litters every year. That remarkable reproductive rate makes population control extremely difficult. Researchers with Texas A&M AgriLife Extension have repeatedly concluded that removing only a small percentage of hogs has little lasting effect. Unless a large proportion of the population is removed consistently, numbers recover surprisingly quickly. That reality pushed wildlife managers to consider options beyond hunting and trapping. One proposal attracted immediate attention: warfarin. Most people know warfarin as a medicine used to prevent blood clots. In much higher concentrations, however, it becomes a toxicant. The product approved for feral hog control was called Kaput Feral Hog Bait. It was developed specifically for wild pigs and designed for use inside specialized feeders intended to reduce access by other animals. The blue dye served a practical purpose. If someone later found a poisoned hog, the blue fat would immediately indicate that the meat should not be eaten. To supporters, it was another safety feature. To critics, it became another reason for concern. Almost as soon as Texas approved the emergency rule allowing the bait in 2017, the controversy began. Wildlife organizations questioned whether non-target animals could still gain access to the poison. Hunters worried about accidentally harvesting poisoned hogs. Others raised concerns about scavengers feeding on contaminated carcasses. Animal welfare groups criticized the use of an anticoagulant poison altogether. What began as a new tool for controlling an invasive species quickly became one of the most debated wildlife management decisions in Texas. And before the bait could be widely deployed, the fight moved from the field to the courtroom. And rather rapidly. The legal battle also moved quickly. Shortly after the emergency rule was introduced, the decision was challenged in court. The lawsuit was filed by Wild Boar Meats, LLC, a Texas company that processed feral hog meat. Supporting briefs were later submitted by organizations including the Texas Hog Hunters Association and the Environmental Defense Fund. Together, they raised concerns about food safety, non-target wildlife, and the wider environmental risks associated with the bait for Zavaish. Their concerns focused on one question: what happens after a poisoned hog dies? Warfarin does not kill instantly. It usually takes several days before the toxic effects become fatal. During that time, a poisoned hog may travel long distances. If it dies in thick brush or woodland, scavengers could eventually feed on the carcass. Supporters of the bait argued that the risk of secondary poisoning was low. The manufacturer maintained that the specialized feeders limited access to hogs and that the amount of warfarin remaining in carcasses posed little danger to most scavenging animals. Critics were not convinced. They questioned whether raccoons, vultures, coyotes, or other wildlife could still be exposed. Others worried about domestic dogs or livestock encountering poisoned carcasses before they were found. Another concern involved hunters. Texas has a large recreational hog hunting community. Although the blue dye was intended to warn against eating poisoned animals, critics argued that not every hunter would recognize what the color meant. Some questioned whether every poisoned hog would even survive long enough for the dye to become obvious. The debate quickly expanded beyond science. It became a political issue. Supporters argued that Texas could no longer rely on hunting alone. Decades of experience had shown that recreational hunting rarely reduced feral hog numbers over the long term. In some cases, hunting pressure even scattered sounders into smaller groups, making coordinated removal more difficult. Researchers have consistently found that effective population reduction requires removing a very large proportion of hogs every year. That is an expensive and labor-intensive task. To many landowners, another tool seemed necessary. Opponents agreed the problem was serious, but simply disagreed on the solution. Some argued that improving trapping methods would be safer. Others favored coordinated aerial control using helicopters. Research has shown that helicopter operations can remove large numbers of hogs in suitable terrain, particularly when combined with trapping programs. No single method works everywhere. Wildlife experts generally recommend combining several approaches rather than relying on only one. After a court issued a temporary restraining order blocking the program, Symmetrics, the manufacturer of Kaput Feral Hog Bait, chose to withdraw the product from the Texas market rather than continue a prolonged legal battle. As a result, the bait never became the statewide solution many supporters had envisioned. Today, feral hog management still relies primarily on trapping, aerial removal, hunting, and coordinated landowner programs. The poison remains one of the most controversial chapters in that effort. The debate also highlighted a larger problem. There is no easy answer. Feral hogs reproduce quickly and adapt rapidly, and once established across a landscape, removing them becomes extraordinarily difficult. Texas is not alone. Feral hog populations now exist across much of the southern United States, causing billions of dollars in damage nationwide over time. Wildlife managers continue searching for better control methods. Researchers are studying new trapping technologies. Others are exploring fertility control and improved monitoring techniques. But every proposal faces the same challenge. How do you reduce an invasive population without creating new risks for the surrounding environment? That question has never been fully settled. Perhaps that is why the story of the blue fat continues to spread online. Photos of brightly colored hog fat often appear with dramatic captions, suggesting a mysterious disease or an unknown biological phenomenon. The explanation is far less mysterious. The color comes from a blue dye, intentionally added to Kaput Feral Hog Bait. It was never meant to create headlines. It was designed as a warning, a visible marker to discourage anyone from consuming a poisoned animal. Yet that practical safety feature became one of the most recognizable images in the entire debate. In the end, the real mystery was never what turned the fat blue. Officials answered that question years ago. The harder question was whether poisoning millions of invasive animals was a price worth paying. For some Texans, the answer was yes. The damage had become too great to ignore. For others, the environmental and ethical concerns outweighed the potential benefits. Years after the proposal first appeared, those arguments remain unresolved. Texas is still fighting its feral hog problem. The animals are still causing enormous damage, and the controversial poison that promised to help solve it remains one of the most debated wildlife management decisions the state has ever considered.